discuss behaviors occurring in the house, as well as the house itself. It might seem like what goes on in the house stays in the house, but in reality there are several ways that household practices can influence the lake. We will discuss septic systems, cleaning products, and the potential for runoff from the roof or the road, and how we can minimize this risk. So you've already signed the confidentiality form and the photo release form with the resident, so now you're in the house. So kind of my thing is that if you're in the house, you might as well just do the house stuff while you're here, right? So you can flip to your house section. Okay. And so some of the questions you're just going to ask the resident. So just talk with them. How long have you lived here? How old is the house? That kind of thing. What do they use the cottage for? So is it a weekend getaway? Are they here full time? Are they here full time but only in the summers? So those are things that you can fill out on the form, and also if they say anything kind of that doesn't really fit on the form, just make a note of it, because it's important for a lot of these questions how often they're using it, and what the kind of use protocol is. So especially when you get to stuff with the septic system, you're gonna want to understand how often they're using it, because a septic field might be great for someone who's out here only 2 weeks of the year and it's just them and their partner. But maybe not for someone who's out here full-time year-round. So it's important to make sure you know that kind of thing. And so the question that says, are most visitors familiar with lakeshore living? Why do you think we asked that question?
Because of how, like, if people come to visit and they're not sure of what they need to do, they might be using more water or, not conserving quite the same way because they're not sure protocols. If they bring their own shampoos that have phosphate, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So, a lot of times these they're beautiful properties, and so they have their family coming out all summer, and it's a lot of people, so usage just increases, period. And also, people don't know, right? If you're from the city, you might not know, different aspects of kind of lakeshore living. So that's why we have the green guest guide in the office. So if they say, we have visitors here all the time, and they don't really know what they're doing, and they're always, flushing things down the toilet, then you can say, okay, well, we'll give you one of the green guest guides, and it's like a cute little sign that says don't do this when you're at the lake. So, okay. After you ask them all these things, this is kind of just an opportunity to talk with them about, the history of their property and that kind of thing. So it's more just a chatting section. And then we'll move on to the sewage disposal system. So you're going to ask them again what type of sewage disposal system that they have, because, you can't really tell from sitting in here. So you'll ask them, and they'll tell you, they'll have a holding tank or a septic field. So just they'll tell you about that, and you need to know that. So if they do have an outhouse, you need to know the depth of the outhouse and also the distance from the lake. So why do you think you need to know those things?
So there's regulations for how far they're supposed to be, and that'll affect how deep it is, and how close to the lake will affect if it stops running into the lake.
The groundwater, potential leakage,
for sure.
Contamination.
Yeah, so there's going to be distances from the well also that need to be considered. So if they have a holding tank, then there's more questions you're going to ask them. So, have they ever had a leak test, the capacity of the tank when it was last pumped, and the distance from the lake. So some of the same rationale applies to that question, so distance from the lake. What about the capacity and when the last time it was pumped? Why do you think those are important questions for a holding tank?
Well, capacity will tell you how much you can hold, over a time period, and last time it was pumped, you want it pumped quite frequently, especially if you have higher usage.
Yeah, definitely. And then leak test, usually in my experience most people haven't got a leak test done on their holding tank. And why do you think that it's important that they would?
Well, just general maintenance also, and you can't see it, so you don't know if there's any problems happening.
Yeah,
so it's just useful.
They could be leaking chemicals into the groundwater.
Definitely. Okay, so obviously the sections if they don't have an outhouse, then don't worry about talking to them about outhouses. If they don't have a holding tank, don't worry about talking to them about holding tanks. So septic field, if they have a septic field, you need to find out where it's located. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know. So you need to talk with them about that. And then again, so how close is it to the nearby surface water? So we have the categories less than 30 meters, over 30 meters. They're supposed to be over 30 meters away. Usually the property is not even 30 meters deep. So if this is the case and it's under 30 meters, kind of write down, well, how close is it? Is it as back as far as it could be on their property? Because you're not going to be buy the property adjacent to you and put your septic field further back. You're going to want to just make your suggestions reasonable. Okay, so, and then the distribution box inspection, you're gonna ask them about that, and you're gonna ask them about driving vehicles on their property, and pumping again. So why would you ask them about vehicles on their property?
Can break the distribution pipes, cause problems.
Yeah, so that could be tractors or ride mowers or, you know, trucks, anything can have that effect. And then for septic systems, you're gonna ask them when they got it pumped last, but how would that be different from pumping with a holding tank?
With septic, you can go longer without having to have it pumped.
Yeah.
Just because the effluent is moving through the pipes into the field.
Right.
So there's just a small amount of sludge at the bottom.
Yeah, for sure. So with septic fields, it's like 3 to 5 years, like depending on usage. Holding tanks depends on usage, obviously. Okay, so then you're in the house, so you're gonna ask them about their cleaning products. So when you ask them if they use phosphate-free soaps and cleaners, they might not know. In which case, what would you do?
Ask to see it.
Just read the bottles, a couple
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah, for sure. Also, like, you know, if you're in the washroom, just like noticing, you know, because you'll recognize the brand, so you can kind of see like, oh, you know, they are using them or whatever. So yeah, and usually you can just ask them to see, and they'll just pull it out for you, and you can check the ingredients for them, that kind of thing. And then you're gonna ask them about septic enzyme additives. So what would you do in that situation? Like when you ask them, they're like, oh, I'm not really sure, I'll just show you, and then they show you the box.
Maybe ask them like why they feel they need to add them, like what's the purpose they're adding them, and then explain, like, because there's the two kinds, explain the difference between them.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. And just noticing which one that they have. They're usually pretty obvious. Usually it just says like, you know, septobac, so it's like a bacterial one, or whatever it'll say, like enzyme additive, and so I think more commonly they're bacterial. So you can just ask them about that again, but sometimes they'll say, yeah, I use septobac, and then you can just be okay, and move on. We'll talk about what septobac is or whatever, but you don't need to see it. If they tell you what septobac is and you know, you don't need to bring it out. So then why would you ask them about harsh chemical products?
Because those can end up in the groundwater right in the lake if they're using them and kill bacteria that's in their septic fields or their septic tank. So it's not really doing much good.
Yeah. So usually bleach is like the big one that they'll say like, oh, well, you know, I put bleach in my laundry, or I put bleach in my sink to just kind of clean it, or like in the toilet for odor. So yeah, just letting them know that, you know, bleach is going to be harmful in their system. Okay, so why would you ask them about water usage?
Telling you like septic field, like what goes into there and like how often they should maintain it, and it provides a lot of guidelines in that sense.
So what are some sort of like pros you could offer them about minimizing water usage?
Low flush toilets or low flow shower heads, faucets, anything like that.
Yeah.
Putting the weight in the tank to displace the water, and then if you don't have like the low flush toilet, it still uses less water because it's displaced.
And so why is it good for them to minimize water usage? There's actually like a lot of angles you can come from here.
It's
So
going to cost them less money.
why?
Because they're not going to be paying for as much utilities if they're using less.
And they'll pay to get their septic pumped less often.
Yeah.
What are some other sort of perks of minimizing water usage? It's obviously the economy, you know, the financial one, but what else? Kind of our mandate. It's just like
Water conservation in general, it's just something that people should be aware of and working towards.
And especially when you have a well, you know, that's coming out of the groundwater. So like, you know, if your community uses your aquifer, you should go drill deeper. It's going to cost you more again to put your well deeper and then pull more water up. So conserving water in lake communities is obviously really valuable. Okay, so water flow. So like, the format of the form is, do they avoid excessive usage? Yes or no? And then if like yes, usually do they have low flow devices? So is it like just that they try to like minimize it, like they don't have any actual devices but they try to use only a pot of water, or is it you know, that they actually do have all the devices installed and that kind of thing? And this is where if you do come up with anything about like tax credits or any sort of discount for like installing low flow or like other environmentally friendly products, then you can bring that up because it's kind of like a good incentive for them. And that can vary county to county, so you'll kind of all have to look into that on your own. Okay, so question number 6, are there willows or poplars near the septic system? Why would you ask that?
because they'll like root off and they can wreck pipes by just rooting into them.
Why willows and poplars? Like all plants have roots.
Well, because they're
like water loving.
Yeah, and they'll
roots that
throw up new shoots there. That's what I was trying to say. They'll throw up new shoots anywhere and they spread out farther. They go for the water.
Perfect.
They like detect the water kind of in a way.
So under that same token, that's why they're really good for shorelines.
Yeah.
Because they will help stabilize the shoreline. But you want to make sure. So sometimes it's kind of, you have to think about the trade-offs of what you're suggesting, because like sometimes septic field is close to the buffer zone and there is willows in the buffer zone. So you kind of have to think about that when you're making your suggestions, because it's like your suggestions are usually plant willows on the shoreline and don't have willows by your septic system. So if those two things are like mutually exclusive, then you kind of have to think about that when you're making suggestions. Section D, the well. So that's kind of the same sort of question. So like you're gonna ask them how deep it is, what's their water quality like. So do they notice that they have an odor? Do they drink their water? Is it hard? Is it soft? That'll usually be fairly consistent across a lake or across a summer village, just because it's the same water. If it's not, then that might be a property issue, which might be something to do with an outhouse or some sort of contaminant in the water system. Like only their property is having some weird odor. So you can talk with them about that. Like they might say, oh yeah, the water in Birch Cliff is really hard. Like, or they might just be like, yeah, like in the last year we really noticed like a weird odor, so we kind of stopped drinking it. And then you can think about why they might be noticing that. So you'll ask them that, and then why would you ask them the depth of their well?
Contamination risks, depending on if it's closer to the surface or if it's down deep.
Which has a higher contamination risk?
Surface.
Why?
It's more likely to get runoff come into it directly or get tampered, like the lids and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So shock chlorination. This is something people do to their wells. Like a lot of lakefront residents do it. Why do they do it?
The biofouling or fueling, like the buildup of like the slime or the corrosion, sort of, just to clean it out like yearly. I think they usually do.
So we have all the fact sheets in the office on shock chlorination that you can give them. A lot of people do it. It's not necessarily bad, as long as they're not doing it too frequently. So that's why we ask them, how often do you do it? Because if they do just have kind of sedimenty like water, like not the best quality, then they're going to shock chlorinate because it's almost necessary. But they might just be doing it out of habit. So it's important to ask them why. So like, did you notice something and then you started shock chlorinating like to deal with that problem? Or did you just like shock chlorinate because you thought that you should? Which is kind of what happens with the septic enzymes too. They just do it because they think that they should. So asking them why they do it and how often they do it. So, if they're like, we do it every week, then you're like, okay, like, maybe not. Yeah, but so just making sure you're familiar with like the common recommendations for that stuff is good. Hot tub, he doesn't have one, but he'll talk if they do. So, why would you ask them if they use bromine or chlorine in their hot tub?
Bromine is less reactive than chlorine is, so it would be better if it got dumped into the environment rather than chlorine.
Right. So why do you ask them where it's drained?
Because you want to know where that water's going, because it does have chemical in it, and it will like, if it's closer to the lake, it's going to be different than if they're draining it at the back of the property. So
farther away is good, and what else would you suggest for draining?
Let it gas off for a day, and then only drain a little bit over a couple of days rather than all at once, so that it has time to infiltrate down and spread out.
Draining it incrementally definitely is a big one. What about so should they drain it just like on their lawn?
If they can divert it into like vegetation, that'll benefit the vegetation and also like reduce the amount of like surface pooling, I guess.
Yeah. Why would it do that? Like why is it better to do it into the trees? Like how does it prevent pooling?
Because they have deeper roots, so they're able to absorb the water instead of having it run out.
Yeah, it'll just sit on the lawn otherwise.
Yeah.
And it reduces like erosion. If it's going into the vegetation, it's gonna like divert it. It won't just like have a straight stream, making a gully.
Definitely. And so then you're gonna based on what they tell you of how they drain it and where they're draining it, then you're gonna have to evaluate the potential for that to enter the surface water. So so for example, if I'm someone who I don't let my hot tub gas off and I drain it all at once on my lawn, what would you say is the potential for for that to enter the surface water.
Moderate to severe.
Yeah. So what if I drain it into trees? So I have some trees on my property on the front, like on the buffer zone, but my property is really, really steep.
I would say it's still moderate to severe for just going into the lake.
Yeah. And so, but maybe if I do drain it into the trees and my property is steep, but I do it incrementally.
Be more.
Minor, moderate, almost like midway.
Yeah. So obviously there is some kind of personal, bias when answering these questions, because you're all going to have a kind of different idea of what is minor, what is moderate, what is severe. So, and you can always make notes. So that will help us later when we go back and look at the report, and also that will help you when you're writing your report, because like you're going to do so many that, taking notes to help you remember. So if you just write severe, then you're going to give some generic advice on, what you should do about severe chance of entering surface water. Whereas if you're like, the property is really steep and it has a lot of trees and that's why I put severe, then that'll help you make a better suggestion. So one severe might not necessarily be equivalent to another severe, you know what I mean? So the notes are really helpful, definitely. Okay, so that's most of the house stuff. So again, you would just be usually I'm just in here asking them the questions, because I mean, you don't need to see the hot tub, like you don't need to see, anything like that. So you can just chat with them in the house, and have a coffee, whatever, and answer those questions, check out the products. And then once you're done this, the next section that I usually move to is the buffer zone.